Everybody, Ben here, welcome back to another tournament game analysis video. Today we're going to be covering round number 1 of the Quebec Open. I am playing as black. Let's get into it. D4, D5, C4, and C6, the semi-slow. Knight F3, Knight F6, Knight C3, E6, E3, Knight BD7, Queen C2, and Bishop D6. So this is just like all very well-known theory. And then my opponent plays a move that is theoretical and has been played a fair amount, but is it's pretty surprising. Still, G4. And G4, you kind of need to know what to do here, because if you don't, then some problems can occur. Like taking the pawn isn't really the smartest idea because it justifies everything with rook g1 and they get the open g file. And they're going to castle long, so their king is going to be relatively safe. And if we play something like, well, anything else, then g5's coming. So h6 is the undoubtedly more challenging try against g4. And the idea is just to prevent g5 or force them to kind of double down. And one way they can do that is by playing rook g1. And there's a strategic concept that we need to know that is very useful here. Whenever your opponent is playing on the side of the board, what do we do? Right, so we play in the center. And this is what we should do. We should play e5. If we break down the center and just open things up, arguably our king will be safer even if we potentially castled kingside here. We don't need to immediately, but that is something that we could do. And there's actually a pretty common line that we should know. So c takes d5, c takes knight b5, bishop e8, g5 takes, and it's important here just to know the move e4, and after e4, and then bishop d2. Black's fine. We're totally okay here. It's still a really messy position, which I think is exactly what white would want if they play a line like this. But it's important to know. So just something to point out here. But okay, after e5, my opponent plays a surprising move, knight h4. And this kind of surprised me because it's not something I was familiar with, and it didn't really look correct. So I had a few instincts here. G6, goading them into sacrificing, and then also A6. A6 was wrong, and that's what I ended up playing. But A6 is incorrect mainly because of knight f5, bishop f8, and then a move like f4. Really trying to create a central grip. And again, they're just going to castle long, so this is like a little bit more justified. And this position gets pretty messy, and it's unfortunate because, well, we undeveloped our bishop. I thought this would have been fine, but, you know, it's allowing quite a bit. So I don't really think that's the smartest thing to do. And after knight h4, there's a lot I had to calculate after the move g6. So there's two things that can be done. Do they take immediately or do they wait? I think taking immediately is just completely wrong. And the reason why is because after it takes king f8, and then the natural move g5 here, we can just take, and go queen e7, and then we're going to pretty much always follow up with queen f7 unless they do something like taking on e5. And once that happens, then we should be totally fine if we can trade queens, because then we're just a piece up. But there was another line that worried me, and that was c takes d5 first, with the idea of trying to get the long diagonal. And if I take back, then it's actually justified to take on g6. And queen takes g6, king f8. One thing I looked at here was knight b5 earlier. So instead of taking immediately, oh, my apologies, c takes d5, c takes d5, knight b5 here. And I have to find the move knight e4. If I don't and I play bishop e8, then again, knight takes g6 is actually just straight up winning at this point. King f8. And they don't even have to play g5, but g5 is like the most instructive. Let's just say queen e7. To illustrate the point of knight b5 is b3, and bishop a3 is coming. And this is extremely dangerous. And of course, if I take, which is also something we have to look at, they don't even take back. They can just play b3 here, actually. And this is just winning, because either bishop a3 is coming or bishop d2 to b4. If we give the check, bishop d2 to b4. And there's not really a great way to stop this from coming in. And again, the sacrifice is fully, like, there's full compensation for it. So this is really, really bad for us. Instead, yeah, after c takes, I have to find queen e7, which is not easy to ask in a position like this. That's not the first move that would come to mind. Just giving up the pawn. So that's why in this position I played a6. But after a6, of course, now knight f5 is justified. And knight h4 is justified, most importantly. So after knight f5, I played bishop f8. And then we saw the move bishop d2 instead of f4. And I was a little bit happy about this because now I was able to play g6. And I felt like the bishop on d2 wasn't as great because now there's no bishop a3 if like knight b5, and of course there's no more knight b5. So I was pretty happy about that. My opponent played knight h4. Arguably it belongs on g3 because now there's always like discovery threats of like knight e4 in the position. And then, well, I played knight e4 immediately. There's also an argument to make about taking and then playing queen e7, where then we play knight e4 to try to close things up. And again, we were trying to take advantage of the knight on h4 being in a bad place, because if they take, and then they have to play a move like knight g2, which isn't really desirable at all. So we would be pretty happy about that. I went for the immediate knight e4, because I thought this was promising. And the idea is if they take, we can just take back if we want to. And the problem is the knight's still hanging. And if they move their knight, we can probably just start developing. And going for the pawns doesn't really make sense here. We castle, and this feels like a King's Indian, where it's like, it's just a beautiful King's Indian. And as a previous King's Indian player, this is a dream come true. There's also ideas of taking on h4, but maybe the opening of the position like this could be problematic, where we might have to play something really awkward like knight b6. So that's why taking on e4 instead is better, which is a little surprising, but very, very justified, actually. Anyways, okay, so c takes d5 was played. Which is actually just a blunder, and it's a surprising one because it doesn't look like one. It looks like a natural move. It looks like, okay, yeah, we just take back on d5. They maybe even take on d5 or take on e4. It's a mess. And arguably, you could say that the trade on d5 might favor white just because it opens up the c file. And, you know, if they castle long, played king b1, rook c1, it feels like they might get to it first. But again, none of this stuff matters because we do have a move here which wins the game. And the move here is knight takes d2. And the problem is after knight takes d2, there's not really a good reply. If they take back, we take on h4 and we're up a piece, which we're happy to do. Even if we, like, after, again, queen takes d2, queen takes h4, even if they take here or something, it doesn't really matter because it doesn't matter how messy the position they make it. Maybe that's still something they should try for some counterplay. But at the end of the day, we're going to go bishop g7 and castle. So we should be pretty happy about that. And I don't think we're going to have many issues. So after knight takes d2, my opponent tried knight takes g6, which had to be calculated. It has to be. But I saw this next move, which is important, because this counter-sacrifice idea If we take it, then, well, this is not good. First off, queen takes g6 check, king e7 and d6 would be a checkmate. But even after queen takes g6, we just see like this was a complete mess, and that feels pretty good for them. But we have this important move, which actually just defends our knight, funnily enough, and that's knight f3 check. And after knight f3 check, they can't play king e2 because we can take on g1 instead of taking on g6, which is very important for us. So after knight f3 check, they play king d1. They have to play king d1. Again, knight takes g1 with check. Losing a rook with check doesn't make any sense. We could take the rook, or we could do what I played. I like what I played, rook to g8. And the idea is I'm just trying to recapture with the rook and just also prevent any counterplay with some sort of taking. Because if we take on g1 and then they take on h8, yeah, maybe it's winning. It's also really messy. And I thought that rook g8 was just a little bit more clear, where we're attacking their knight, and we're also threatening knight takes g1. Like, if they take on f8, then we can take on g1, which I think makes more sense, like takes f8. And then we take on g1, where they probably are forced to take on d7. We could just take back. And, well, our king's a little open, but this is a lot of material up. We're up like a full rook here, I believe. So this is fully justified in my book. But my opponent played d takes on c6 instead, which complicates things, just trying to make it even messier. I just take back, trying to avoid any crazy variations that are unnecessary to allow. Queen e4, and rook takes g6. So I just trade and trade. And the idea here is that, well, you still have a potential safety with bishop g7, king f8, king g8. They have to take on f3. And also, I can try to force a queen trade. And the important part of rook takes g6 that I was happy about is that it defends c6. That's another important thing. So instead of playing some like really slow move like bishop g7, that makes no sense. Rook takes g6 just captures, gets a trade in where, well, we're up a piece right now. And again, allows my next move, which is queen f6. And they're, if they don't want to trade queens, which they probably shouldn't, then they have to make more concessions. So they play queen e2. I play queen e6, just looking at the g4 pawn, and also threatening to take on d4, where, again, I would trade queens. So if they do something like king c2, I can at least consider taking on d4 and then taking on e2, which, again, if we trade queens successfully here, then I feel like the game's definitely over. Queen d3 was played, and I took on g4, of course. There's an important thing to mention here, that bishop h3 doesn't work because we can take with check. So bishop g2 was played, and then I played queen g6, which again offers a queen trade and also threatens rook takes g2. And of course, this was not allowed. They played queen f1, and then after my next move, my opponent resigned. I took on d4, and the point is, if they take back, I can at least consider rook takes d4. And the computer's not even giving that. They're giving like rook b8, which is not a good sign. Rook takes d4 also looks pretty tempting though as well. Or yeah, king e1 is given for some reason instead of like king c1. But the issue here is supposedly like knight c5. Again, like another pretty surprising move, knight c5. But yeah, again, we're just like, we're very, very active here, and there's not much that can be done about it after e takes d4. Like, if we take on d4 with check, that already feels like, okay, well, like, it feels like their king is actually weaker than ours somehow. And if their king is weaker than ours, or even if it's about equal for the king safety part, we're up a piece. So that should favor us in the end. And yeah, the game is over. So this was round number 1 of the Quebec Open. I feel like I used my time a little bit better in this game as opposed to previous tournaments. And that was something that I was focusing on before the event happened and during this one. So that's just a few things to mention there. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the game, and I will see you in round number 2. Have a good one. Bye-bye.